Caralho, o bruxo das Américas. Mas esse é o Léo da 17, sucesso com a mulherada. Prepara essa buceta aqui, hoje é balão. O balão das casinhas vai, é só mandelão, eu quero ver.
Até onde vai a globalidade?
Salve, salve pessoal, mais uma live de chau. Decidi fazer uma venda aqui nessa região, tá? Acho que é uma venda que tem um bom potencial. Bom, tivemos essa mudança de característica aqui, esse fair value aqui, identifiquei esse ponto como um possível ponto de liquidez, tá? Eu pretendo tentar carregar até aqui, nessas mínimas. E vamos ver o que acontece aí. Bom, tá aí. O stop eu coloquei acima do candle que gerou o fair value gap.
Imagine criar um aplicativo com a sua assinatura, só com o
Bom, pessoal, eu começo a não gostar muito dessa configuração, tá? Pra ser sincero. Eu vou diminuir o stop. Eu esperaria uma agressão maior dos vendedores nesses patamares. Caso contrário, eu vou tentar revender nessas regiões aqui de cima. Porque eu tenho essa liquidez aqui ainda que talvez ainda não tenha sido totalmente capturada. Eu sempre procuro amenizar sempre o mais rápido possível o risco na operação. Praticamente no 0 a 0 aí. Eu realmente aguardo que Tô acreditando que com a abertura de Londres, Londres possa vir pelo menos capturar essa liquidez ou esse fundo aqui, tá? Algum desses dois fundos. A operação já está salva. Bom, o DXY está praticamente no 0 a 0, euro dólar praticamente no 0 a 0, JPY caindo 0,24, GBP 0 a 0, mercado bem flat no momento, tá? Com o dólar trabalhando na estabilidade, eu começo a acreditar que talvez seja um pouco difícil esse preço cair da forma que eu espero, né? Vamos ver. Eu gostaria de ver um DX um pouquinho mais positivo para confluir com essa venda aí no Shao. Nikkei subindo 0,27. Os metais, a maioria trabalhando em queda. Minério de ferro cai 0,20% agora, o ouro 0,30%. A prata caindo 1,90%. O cobre cai no 0,14%. O único que sobe neste momento é a platina, 0,56%. O VIX está positivo em 1%. Petróleo WTI sobe 0,20%. Lembrando, pessoal, que essa live não é uma live de sinais, tá? É uma live que eu gosto de realizar para que eu possa ter um journal trade, né? Para que eu possa deixar registradas as minhas operações no dia a dia, para que eu possa revisitar, né? E então, de forma alguma, é uma sala de sinais, tá? É uma sala. Aqui é um canal onde eu uso como se fosse um journal trade, até mesmo para mostrar o meu trabalho. Eu já opero há mais de 7 anos, estudo economia. É algo que realmente eu gosto muito de realizar no meu dia a dia, né? E deixem sugestões aí, o que vocês estão achando do canal. Eu também opero outros ativos, eu opero mercado americano, eu opero Dow Jones, Nasdaq, Russell, né? O índice de small caps. Opera um pouquinho Ásia também. Estou começando a operar Oriente Médio. Deixem sugestões aí. Opera o mercado brasileiro também. Ó, eu gostaria de ver o mercado rompendo esse fundo aqui, mudando essa característica aqui, ó. Tá? Só que é válido lembrar que para confirmar essa mudança de característica, ele vai precisar romper o próximo fundo. Algo semelhante a isso. O mercado, ele muda a característica, ele faz um topinho menor e aí sim ele dá continuidade na queda, tá? Então, aqui seria uma provável mudança de característica. E aqui seria a confirmação, a validação dessa mudança de característica, tá? Então, é esta movimentação que eu espero agora, tá? Não estou dizendo que vai acontecer mercado não tem como você adivinhar algo, né? O mercado faz o que quer a hora que quer. Eu apenas trabalho com estatística baseada em evidências, tá? Uma operação está no MetaTrader aí, né? Olha, eu vou salvar um pouquinho mais, porque eu realmente não gostaria de ver esse preço rompendo esses topos aqui, tá? Até poderia deixar onde tá, mas uma hora começa a ficar interessante para mim, tá? Eu acho que a formação do próximo candle ainda é provável que o mercado ainda volte a fazer uma entrada por confirmação. Caso isso aconteça, me tiraria, né? Mas eu não fico muito seguro, até mesmo porque o mercado já mitigou esse fair value, que é essa urgência de vendedores, né? Não chegou a romper, tá? Eu preciso ver rompendo, eu preciso ver convicção nesse fundo, convicção dos vendedores. Bom, tá chegando numa região de fair value, tem um fair valuezinho aqui. Vamos ver como o preço se comporta a partir daqui. Eu gostaria de ver a formação de um candle fazendo outro fair value aqui nessa região, tá? Caso seja formado um fair value nessa barra aqui que está trabalhando aqui agora, nessa região, eu caso seja formado um, 'um, 'uma urgência de vendedores aqui, um fair value gap aqui, Dependendo de como seja a agressão dos vendedores aqui, eu vou voltar a fazer uma revenda aqui caso o mercado faça um pullback. Eu vou acrescentar mais um lote aqui, tá? Caso isso ocorra. Tá? Para mim ainda não mudou a característica. Ficou só pavio. Vamos dar uma olhada em notícia.
People think that's the case, but it isn't. So I wonder if you could touch on that.
Yeah, I think people have this perception that because the Chinese
Deixar na
government
Bloomberg aqui
is very
pouco.
controlling and has a lot of access to what's going on in Chinese citizens' private lives, that means that there's these beautifully curated, extremely complete, large databases of information that can be used to train AI systems or to do other things. But for anyone who's ever worked with data, you know that cleaning data, structuring data, making sure that the right information is flowing in the right places is incredibly challenging. So it's both true that the Chinese government can get very detailed information on the private lives of its citizens if it chooses to, and also true that it's incredibly messy the way that works, and incredibly difficult for any given actor to get access to something. So for instance, a company trying to train some AI model using data is actually subject to a pretty significant data governance setup in China, data governance regulations that make it really challenging to use customers' data for things it wasn't already designed for, or that you didn't already get consent for.
Which we learned from Cambridge Analytica scandal just as one case, and there are many others. That is not the case in the US. It's
That's
not
right.
the case in Europe. There's a lot going on. I mean, the EU's AI Act is pretty widely praised by some people, not everybody, but it's quite broad and far-reaching. But that's not the case in China. In terms of what you're saying.
So China's setup is now more similar to the GDPR that exists in Europe. So around kind of protecting consumer data and giving people the right to opt in to different uses. Of course, in China, there's always the exception, unless the security services think that you might be a dissident, and then they're going to get whatever they want on you. But in terms of kind of companies, they're certainly relatively restricted in what they can do.
Switching gears a little bit, Dan, I'm curious about how China's sluggish economic growth recently weighs into the government's calculus and how they're thinking about AI's potential to spark social unrest?
I think that the Communist Party is very much involved in trying to think about, how to control possible social unrest. I was in Shanghai in November 2022 when there were protests in the streets denouncing zero COVID, denouncing the Communist Party, that these were things that were erupting. And so I very much sign on to Helen's description of AI, that China is leading in the AI of censorship. It is leading in the AI of facial recognition. That right now it looks very much like the US is a place where ordinary consumers can tinker with and play around on a lot of these AI tools, whereas in China is mostly reserving these very powerful tools for its own use, potentially to control society. That right now China is in a moment of economic weakness. This might deteriorate further, this might get a little bit better, but there is always this presence hovering over there that the state security might ramp up its technology really to make sure that there are no socially destabilizing incidents.
Well, Helen, Dan, thank you so much for being here. It's been great to learn from the both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. NVIDIA beats forecast, but investors shrug, raising fresh doubts about whether the AI boom can keep powering the markets. But despite the muted response, Asian shares extend their gains to a fourth straight day as turmoil driven by concerns over the impact of AI eases. And the U.S. and Iran are set to resume nuclear talks later today amid fears of renewed U.S. strikes if the two fail to reach an agreement. It has just gone 9 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Joanna Versace in Dubai. Well, first of all, let's start with those NVIDIA earnings because they actually were pretty solid. You had a revenue beat, you had a beat on data center revenue, the margins all in line, and yet somehow you had a very muted response in the after hours with extended trading, which tells you that, once again, to quote our MLive strategist, maybe some of the concerns around AI have been eased, but not necessarily erased. So this is the setup that we have this morning. S&P futures down about 0.2%. So leaning towards the red. The same thing can be said for the NASDAQ as well, leaning slightly negative, despite a better recession in Asia. We'll get to that in just a moment. One statistic that I just want to give you, by the way, on the subject of tech companies and NVIDIA's reporting, this is per Bloomberg Intelligence data. 90% of tech companies who have reported earnings have posted a positive surprise. That is the highest of any sector versus the average of around 74%. So what's actually happening is earnings in the tech space have been positive, but negative sentiment has been overwhelming that part of the market. Very interesting to note. Dollar yen also in focus. There's been quite a lot of activity going on around the yen the last couple of days, especially with the appointment of those two dovish members to the Bank of Japan MPC voting committee. Today, though, what we are seeing is a bit of strength for the yen versus the USD. The USD continues to lose ground versus other Asian currencies as well. So keeping a close eye on that currency pairing. And as far as geopolitics are concerned, that third round of negotiations between Iran and U.S. taking place in Geneva, we'll see if we get a breakthrough. But I've got to say, expectations are very, very low for something really substantial coming out of those discussions. And let's switch over. I just want to say one more thing about NVIDIA before we push on and talk more in detail about the earnings that came through yesterday. Take a look at the white line, which is essentially NVIDIA versus the semiconductor index, the SOX index in the U.S. And you can see that, as we've been talking about day in, day out, this year has been the year of chips, chip makers, chip technology, memory chips, and actually NVIDIA, which is the poster child for many of these high advanced GPU chips that go into AI and AI compute, have been trading sideways. So it hasn't been a great start to the year for NVIDIA. Sentiment has been pretty skeptical around the upside for the stock, where we have seen a lot of love has been in the chip makers themselves. So I think that lends itself nicely to talk about how markets in Asia are faring. Min Lo is in Hong Kong for us, and perhaps you can talk to us about the impact that the NVIDIA earnings is having on some of their key suppliers in the region.
Yeah, and you can see on the screen here the NVIDIA suppliers, the major ones across Taiwan and Japan, are seeing a downdraft across the board. And that's probably because a lot of the high expectations had already been priced into markets, and there's a bit of profit taking that is going on. And it also shows you that it's increasingly becoming very difficult to satisfy investors' expectations. I think the only exception is the Korean semiconductors. If you flip the board, you have Samsung, SK Hynix. These are two key suppliers of NVIDIA as well. Hanmi is a supplier of SK Hynix. These are still performing very well, really solidifying the idea that these Korean semiconductor names are really untouchable. And that's because Samsung and SK Hynix, along with Micron, are the three major suppliers that make the DRAM chips, which are in short supply. And they really have been quite insulated from the AI scare trade so far. You take a look at broader markets in Asia, though, it's broadly on the upside today, but you can see that there is a cap to how much the TAIEX can gain as well. It's been overbought. If you look at the RSI over the last 6 sessions or so, the Nikkei is also pretty much flat, but the Kospi has been still that standout index in Asia above the 6,200 mark, now hitting another record high.
Min, thank you so much. Min Lo in Hong Kong. Let's talk more about those earnings then. NVIDIA has failed to impress investors with its latest sales forecast, signaling that concerns about an overheated AI economy will continue to dog the company. This despite the chip maker delivering a first quarter outlook that easily beats the average estimates. Bloomberg Asia Tech correspondent Annabelle Jewelers joins us from Hong Kong. So I ran through some of the top line figures and the fact that we did get a revenue beat. We got a revenue from data center beat, margins all in line. Why were investors unimpressed, Belle?
Yeah, I think it sort of speaks to what has been quite a consistent narrative over the past few quarters, which is that we go into these earnings, we very much have the expectation that NVIDIA is going to be surpassing Wall Street estimates, but it still doesn't reach the loftiest of projections. And that's exactly what happened this time around, because the highest projection for first quarter sales was at $80 billion. And the company, of course, guided for $78 billion. Even though that was ahead of estimates, it didn't meet, as I said, that loftiest projection. And so investors are disappointed. But I think, as you referenced, and we just heard from Min there as well, that this sort of very much a trading range that NVIDIA has been stuck in going back over the past few months, where we really haven't seen it breaking out in a sustained direction on either side. And I don't think it's just that story around the concerns around the AI bubble. Of course, this came up during the earnings call. Jensen Huang continued to rebuff those fears. Not just concerns about that, but also around NVIDIA's sustained position in the ecosystem, because obviously it's been very central, as you said, to hyperscalers and on the training side. But what about the inference as we actually move to that deployment of AI technology through the ecosystem? Will NVIDIA's chips continue to be key, particularly when you see the likes of AMD, for instance, trying to muscle in on its territory, and as well the hyperscalers investing in their own semiconductor technology?
Yeah, and a case in point, that big deal that AMD inked with Meta yesterday. China, also a big question mark for NVIDIA. Did we get any guidance as to whether they're actually going to start to be able to sell some of their chips into China?
Not really. I think that is certainly one of the big unknowns still. I mean, of course, China doesn't account or hasn't accounted for any sort of revenue over the past several quarters. And that's exactly what they sort of continue with. They're still not baking in any projections to their first quarter outlook. Yes, they did nod to this. They made the point, for instance, that they did get in a separate filing, this was, but they did make the point that they actually do have the license now from the US to export a small number of H200 chips to China. But it's still that key question around what is the response from Beijing, and will they allow the chip companies or the tech companies rather in the mainland to purchase that technology? Of course, we hear a lot of story about chips that are available through other covert means, for instance, but actually, of course, buying them through proper channels would be preferable, and preferable as well for NVIDIA, of course, because then it can actually start to generate some revenue. But yes, they didn't bake any assumptions into their guidance, as I said, and they haven't generated any revenue under the H200 licensing program thus far.
Annabelle, thank you so much. Bloomberg Asia Tech correspondent Annabelle Jewelers. Well, for more on how markets are reacting, Bloomberg MLife strategist Mark Cranfield joins us from Singapore. Well, Mark, I was just pointing to perhaps the more cautious setup that we have for U.S. futures going into the session today. And how are you reading the knock-on effect that NVIDIA is having on some of these key chip makers, chip suppliers, and the partners of NVIDIA in the region as well?
Well, it's certainly doing nothing to hurt sentiment, especially in Korea, as Annabelle was saying earlier. There, there's a big interest now in what's happening with the Korean companies. You have a tremendous change over the past year or so. You have people like NVIDIA, the other big tech companies in America, the so-called Magnificent Seven. They seem to be the only story in town. Everybody wanted to be involved in that, and that was the key story for global investors. Fast forward to today, and you can see that there's massive demand for people like Samsung, SK Hynix, Taiwan Semiconductor. These stocks are where people want to be. They've also got potential currency appreciation as well. They're seen as being relatively undervalued on a global basis. So when you get a slight stall in the NVIDIA story, there are so many alternatives. And today we're seeing Korean stocks again up. We had one of your fellow anchors, David Ingalls, was saying earlier that if it continues on this path for the next few weeks, the Kospi index will have risen 3 times in value over the past year alone, which is really quite extraordinary for what is now the 9th largest market in the world by market cap. So you have better alternatives, or at least you have very serious alternatives in other parts of the world, and that's where people are looking for the upside, and they can, from that point of view, they don't need to concentrate so much on people like NVIDIA and Meta and Alphabet, those kind of companies.
Yeah, to your point on Kospi, I was reading yesterday on the terminal, you just said 9th largest market value, but it's also now surpassed the market cap of both France and Germany. So it tells you a lot again about where the interest is from the investment community. But we've been so far talking about equities and the equity outperformance, but we're also beginning to see it transpire in Asian FX currencies as well, that strength versus the USD. And on back of that, it's quite difficult to see a sustained bid for the dollar emerge here, isn't it?
Yeah, we're getting a much broader scope of currencies which are competing against the US dollar. And today in particular, it seems to be being led by the Chinese currency. The yuan is exceptionally strong. the fixing today, which is watched very closely by FX traders. The daily dollar yuan fixing was set at the lowest level for nearly 3 years. That was another signal that the central bank in China seems very comfortable with a strong currency, and that's drawing in the other regional currencies which are nearby. So the Korean won, the Taiwanese dollar, the Malaysian ringgit, the Singapore dollar, they're all being pulled in the same direction as the Chinese currency. And so that's helping to help the euro and the Aussie dollar also perform as well. So you've got a situation where even the offshore yuan has been trading a little bit stronger than the onshore for a few days, and yet the central bank is pretty comfortable with that. That's something they have fought back pretty aggressively in the past, but they seem to be more relaxed about it. That's another signal that the Chinese authorities, they're pretty happy with the direction the yuan is taking. They don't mind a strong currency at all. They like to see the foreign investors bring in more money. It's a way of attracting flows into other Chinese assets as well.
Yeah.
So China's in a strong position. It's bringing in the other Asian currencies, and that's a big detriment to the US dollar.
Yeah. Okay. Bloomberg MLife strategist Mark Cranfield, thank you. We are also going to be joined in a few moments by HSBC, who will be speaking to us about their outlook for the dollar as well, as uncertainty grips markets once again amid the U.S. Supreme Court's tariff ruling. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Stephen Engel at Japan's Akasaka Palace in Tokyo, and this is Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade. Watch Bloomberg Tech. This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo. And I'm Christina Ruffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas. The sector is really propelling this deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors. We got a big week coming up in politics.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
Bringing you up to the minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it's happening. I'm Anna Marie Hordern in Caracas, Venezuela, and this is Bloomberg.
The trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Only on Bloomberg.
Well, the dollar weakened for a second day as traders weigh geopolitical tensions in the Middle East and the impact of U.S. tariffs on global trade. Joining us now is Paul Mackel, HSBC Global Head of FX Research from Hong Kong. Paul, good to have you with us as ever. Let's just start with going all the way back to Friday, which feels like a really long time ago now. But the SCOTUS ruling on the Trump administration's use of reciprocal tariffs shot down Trump over the weekend, reintroduced that blanket tariff. I mean, how is all of this going to influence the trajectory for the USD?
Well, look, I think markets, or the currency market at least, has been digesting this probability for less. It still plays to this idea about policy.
Bom, a operação acabou me tirando no trailing stop. Saí com um lucrinho de $12.
Yeah, but at the same time, isn't positioning quite short on the USD given the price action over the past year? And I just feel like sentiment, whenever I speak to anyone, is resoundingly negative on the dollar.
I mean, it's a good point. I mean, if you do look at some of the positioning indicators, namely from the CFTC as an example there, you're absolutely right. I mean, the positioning does seem to be quite short the US dollar, but to change your thinking around the currency is quite difficult. I mean, of course, there's the risk of a squeeze, and that currency, the dollar that is, could trade well, but I think that would be temporary. I think the bigger picture framework for the US dollar is still that it's going to be in a soft orbit for quite some time.
Yeah, Paul, have
Começa a enxergar,
geopolitical hedges just because we're
começa a enxergar esse fair value como como uma possível indução.
around. Would you expect to see that bid if something major does?
And the impact on the currency market has been quite fleeting. So issue that you highlighted. Then you might get a flutter of excitement, but then the
Bom, formou uma barra ignorada
Those
aqui.
elections a couple of weeks ago, and then
Muito provável que esse preço vai dar continuidade para alta, tá? Então, eu começo, talvez, enxergar algum contexto que me propicie a comprar nesse mercado. E essa linha que eu tracei foi um possível draw liquidity. Tem esse outro fair value aqui. Bom, pessoal, tentei vender aqui de novo nessa região. Mas eu tô bem arisco nessa venda, tá? Tenho este fair value aqui. Será que com a abertura de Londres agora poderia vir consumir essa liquidez aqui agora?
Since then, the yen has caught a bid, but again, it's struggling to maintain a sustained momentum. Lots of talk about the new members of the Bank of Japan committee, what the Bank of Japan are going to be doing. How do you see the outlook for dollar yen from here?
Well, it's still quite caught between a rock and a hard place for this currency. I mean, on the one hand, we start to get a bit excited about the stronger mandate for the Prime Minister. Perhaps there could be not as a fiscally loose policy in some ways. But on the other hand, you start to read the local press and you're thinking that maybe there's going to be some pressure on the central bank to not to be as forthcoming in terms of rate hikes. And that starts to put downward pressure on the currency again. So we're caught in this tricky situation that I think investors are trying to understand. But we don't have the ingredients for the Japanese yen to really have a sustained recovery. For that to happen, we would need the Bank of Japan to really be on a hawkish footing, and that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, but perhaps that is not the case for other Asian currencies out there, as I was just speaking to my colleague Mark Cranfield about. I mean, to what extent is the appreciation or the Chinese authorities allowing for CNY appreciation benefiting other Asian currencies in the region?
Well, there's probably some spillover in certain ways, but maybe not as much as what we're accustomed to think, right? I mean, on the one hand, a currency like the Korean won is typically quite sensitive to how the renminbi can trade, but on the other hand, it's been probably more correlated with how the Japanese yen has been weak more recently. But nonetheless, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if the renminbi is going to keep strengthening, which is one of our core views, there's got to be some positive spillovers to the region's currencies altogether.
Paul, thank you so much. As ever, really good to chat to you. HSBC Global Head of FX Research, Paul Mackel. Well, coming up, the U.S. and Iran are set for a third round of negotiations today as the Trump administration levels new sanctions on Iran's missile program. The details next. This is Bloomberg.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets?
We are seeing modest gains across European equity markets.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
We're at the epicenter of a global realignment on a scale not seen for decades. At the intersection between markets, economics and geopolitics, a forum for sophisticated conversation. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. The U.S. and Iran are headed into another round of talks later today in Geneva. The meeting between Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner is set to focus on nuclear talks. But the Trump administration is also demanding Tehran curbs its weapons program.
The negotiations tomorrow and the talks tomorrow will be largely focused on the nuclear program. And we hope progress can be made, because that's the president's preference, to make progress on the diplomatic front. But it's also important to remember that Iran refuses to talk about the ballistic missiles.
Joining me now is Patrick Sykes, Bloomberg's Middle East breaking news editor in Istanbul. Patrick, well, today is the big day. Marco Rubio there is saying that the talks will likely be centered around Iran's nuclear program. Talk us through the respective positions of Iran and the U.S.
Yeah, we're still at the rhetorical level seeing this fundamentally incompatible clash of positions, right? Iran's saying that it's an absolute red line, that it has to retain some kind of enrichment. It's happy to talk about perhaps the level, the location of what's been enriched already. The US occasionally still sticking to that A, zero enrichment line, and B, as you saw with Rubio there, that they want to expand the talks beyond nuclear to the missile program as well. That, again, is another red line for Iran. It's still hard to see how they reconcile those. And that matters today because if you take Trump at his word, this deadline he'd given of 10 to 15 days for Iran to reach a deal, that 10-day point is on Sunday. And with the rate of talks that we've had so far, we've had around every kind of 7 to 10 days. It doesn't look like there's a time for another round that would fit in that timetable. So if we take Trump at his word, it's really make or break in Geneva today.
Yeah, most definitely so. Patrick, I also want to draw our viewers to a story that we published today, including a lot of satellite imagery suggesting that Iran actually is looking to once again fortify and rebuild up some of those key nuclear sites, i.e. they also are preparing for the possibility of, one, an actual limited military strike from the U.S., and two, no full relinquishment of their nuclear program.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was a really interesting analysis, in part because it also rubs up against Trump's line that he'd completely destroyed those nuclear targets in the culmination of the June war last year. So yeah, it shows that Iran's rebuilding, reconstituting, fortifying, so any future attacks will be harder. It's already a program that's famously dispersed around the country. It's partially buried under mountainous terrain. And all of that has got a feature in Trump's calculation and his colleagues as they're weighing the risks and merits of any potential strike, because they've got to think not just, okay, will we be able to destroy a target today at the point of the operation, but what happens tomorrow? Will Iran be able to reconstitute? Does it have the will to reconstitute and the capacity to do so? Those images that we've seen overnight suggest that following the June war, they still do have that capacity and certainly have that will. So Trump has got to think that any future operation of that sort has got to be bigger, but also still, would it be enough to long-term change that calculation in Iran to not try and rebuild in future?
Yeah, I think you mentioned two important terms there. One, they have the capacity to rebuild, and number two, they have the willingness to rebuild as well. Exactly. Patrick Sykes, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Middle East breaking news editor in Istanbul. And a quick look at equity futures before we head to the break. There is red on the screen for S&P, for NASDAQ, and European markets also pointing to open down in the red as well, down about 0.2%. Well, coming up, South Africa's latest budget is being seen as a turning point for the country's public finances. We'll speak with Kotatsu Baloyi, trading structure at RMB, next. This is Bloomberg.
No gráfico de 1 hora, praticamente formando uma barra ignorada aqui. Praticamente uma barra ignorada.
phone is, what's great about it is it's a well-developed gaming ecosystem, right? So folks know to find games there, but it's also a highly competitive gaming ecosystem. So its developedness gives you both that upside and the downside. But what's exciting is that now we are moving beyond the phone to the TV. So I mentioned like one of the big gaming areas we're going after. One of the big gaming areas we're going after now is social gaming experiences that will show up on your TV. So we are now announcing, we're going to announce here actually, that we're going to have these social party games that you can play on your TV with your phone as the controller. And it's things like, recognizable games like Boggle, you got Pictionary, we've got a Lego party game. We, basically are going to like unleash this with a bunch of creators, and they're going to go figure out stuff that we didn't even imagine that they can do with that interactivity.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. I'm Jumana Versace. Join me on Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
You had heightened levels of volatility.
There's still room to maneuver.
We do see opportunities.
It allows you to increase significantly your net income.
Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
Making money isn't about drowning in emotions. It's about understanding what's actually happening. Markets are the best way to glean signal from noise, and that is what we try to do every morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Africa. A region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa.
New episodes every month, only on Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. NVIDIA beats forecasts, but investors shrug, raising fresh doubts about whether the AI boom can keep powering the markets. But despite the muted response, Asian shares extend their gains to a fourth straight day as turmoil driven by concerns over the impact of AI eases. And the U.S. and Iran are set to resume nuclear talks later today amid fears of renewed U.S. strikes if the two fail to reach an agreement. It's just got 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. Well, the setup going into the U.S. session and European session is pretty negative, as you can see from the screens behind me. S&P down 0.2%, the Nasdaq down 0.3%. Investors really focusing on those NVIDIA earnings. And even though they came in pretty solid and actually guided well, there wasn't enough in the street, perhaps, to keep the street satisfied. And so in extended trading, initially we saw an uptick in the stock. It was up 4%, then it was down a couple of percent, and basically ended extended trading around flat. But the setup going into U.S. is pretty negative on back of NVIDIA. So we'll keep an eye out on that. Dollar yen, we've been talking about the yen continues to gain a little bit of ground versus the USD here, just shy of 156, about 0.2% firmer. But the broader story is one of dollar weakness, especially versus some of these Asian currencies, with as well the great performance of some of these key Asian indices. We've been speaking about the Kospi, the stellar performance there, and how it's actually surpassed France and Germany in terms of size of market cap. Similar outperformance coming through from Taiwan as well. So the chip maker trade still very much intact when it comes to some of these Asian indices. And then Brent this morning is trading up 0.4%. Geopolitical sensitivities very high ahead of those negotiations once again in Geneva between Iran and the U.S. And overnight, the U.S. have said that they've sanctioned another 30 entities that are linked to oil and weapons exports from Iran. So applying a little bit more pressure on Iran ahead of those negotiations later today. And then switching over to talk about NVIDIA, our one major focus of the day, just to highlight for you that NVIDIA stock actually hasn't done that much throughout the course of 2026. Year to date, it's only up around 3-4%, sort of flat lines versus, of course, the stellar performance that we had last year. And it tells you that, once again, The broader index, the semiconductor index, the SOX index, has been outperforming NVIDIA because some of those other chip makers are gaining some grounds, and some of them don't even make the GPUs that NVIDIA do. They're really focused on memory chips, and that has been a big theme for the market this year, the shortage of some of those memory chips. So important chart to note there. Okay, let's also check in on how markets in Asia are faring. Min Lo is in Hong Kong for us. Min.
Yeah, as you said, despite those blowout earnings from NVIDIA, we are still seeing some of these NVIDIA supplier stocks in Asia mostly sliding, with the exception of Korea. SK Hynix and Samsung gaining and helping to lift the Kospi up 2.5%, hitting another record high above the 6,200 handle, I believe, for the first time. We did have the BOK standing pat on its rates and also signaling that it will leave rates unchanged for the next 6 months. The BOK also raising the forecast for GDP growth as well as inflation. And so we are seeing a bit of strengthening of the Korean won here, just a touch against the USD. Also some movement in the bond market, bond futures gaining as well. We already have been seeing, by the way, the spread between bond yields as well as policy rates, and that gap is now closing after the BOK decision. The Kospi, of course, really the outperformer in Asia. But you flip the board, we're also watching lithium stocks because Zimbabwe, which is one of the world's largest contributor to lithium, about 10% of lithium supply comes from Zimbabwe. The country has announced that it's banning lithium concentrate exports, and that's caused a jump to lithium prices. And here you can see the lithium stocks gaining in China, and some of the downstream clients that rely heavily on lithium, like CATL, the battery maker, Sungrow Power Supply, declining by about 5% or so.
Min, thank you so much. Min Lo in Hong Kong. Well, South Africa's latest budget is being seen as a turning point for the country's public finances. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says debt will peak this fiscal year for the first time in nearly 2 decades, while the deficit narrows and bond issuance is reduced. Markets responded positively, with the rand stronger, bond yields falling, and equities hitting record highs. For more, we're now joined by Khotatsu Bolayi, trading structure at RMB. So pretty positive price action that we had already on the back of the budget yesterday. Would you say that the debt trajectory that the finance minister presented yesterday marks somewhat of a turning point for South Africa and its economy?
Thank you, Jumania. So actually yesterday's budget was quite a good one, and the danger with going into yesterday's budget was just markets actually overrunning themselves. So pricing in quite a good budget where you end up with a good budget really disappointing. So yesterday's budget was quite a good one, and market is really taking it quite well. The 3 key things that stood out for me in that budget is one, and mainly on the macro side. Number one is just the narrowing deficit. So we saw narrowing deficit of about 4.5% GDP, which is also projected to be 3.7% in the next financial year. Another key factor that stood out as well is just the debt trajectory. So we saw that debt is meant to peak at about 78.9%, and then again going down in the next fiscal year to about 77.3%, which was quite a good one for South Africa. And then another thing is the growth. I mean, we are a country where a few years ago we faced a technical recession, and now we look.
Bom, pessoal, eu tô vendido nessas regiões de topo aqui. Vamos ver o que dá, hein?
Looking at about a 1.6% growth this year, followed by a 1.8% growth in the next fiscal year, and then a 2% growth in the long term in 2028. So that's quite a good budget that we're looking at, and I think market is really taking it quite well. We're seeing dollar rand at about 15.85, coming down quite well. The debt trajectory in that instance, I mean, there's quite 3 factors that are driving a consolidation of debt. The first one we're seeing is just inflation.
We'll get there in a second.
Down.
Yeah. We'll get up on the debt trajectory, but I do just want to ask you also whether a lot of the good news that's baked in this budget can be attributed to just cyclical factors and the fact that we have seen such a huge upswing in commodities prices, which has benefited miners, the price of gold. Can we expect these good days, quote unquote, to continue, or is it just a cyclical feature?
So there is a cyclical feature to it, right? So we have gold. South Africa is a big exporter of gold, and that's doing quite well, which is seen in the corporate income taxes and revenue. So the one key thing that the National Treasury needs to look at now is the containment of debt going forward. So if National Treasury can contain debt and also contain their spending, this can be seen as a turning point for South Africa going forward. So yes, I do see that if we handle the revenue that we currently have quite well, we see a good trajectory for South Africa.
Do you see any possibility for some of the credit rating upgrades to come through on the back of this budget?
So last year we did have a credit upgrade, and with the current trajectory, we are looking at probably a reconsideration of another credit upgrade. So I do see us doing well in terms of that. The issuances, a reduction in issuances of the bonds does fare quite well for the South African government and also for the South African economy. So that does warrant another probably credit upgrade in the near future, yes.
Okay. And one of the comments that has been leveled on the back of this budget is there's obviously been a great focus on balancing the budget, bringing the public finances back in order. Has there been enough emphasis on kickstarting the economy and on investment pledges that will actually stimulate growth in the future?
So the finance minister did mention an investment of about R1 trillion into infrastructure spending. So we are looking at electricity, which has actually quite improved in the past year or so in terms of the production of electricity. We're looking at infrastructure when it comes to water, and that is quite a big one in terms of the South African economy. So a big investment into infrastructure means more jobs, means higher personal income taxes for the government. So we do see the National Treasury actually investing back into the economy going forward.
And you do believe that this debt profiling that the finance ministry presented yesterday can actually be adhered to over the medium term?
I mean, given what has happened in the past year and how well they've turned around the budget in terms of debt, I do think that it's possible that we see it going forward. The finance minister also mentioned an anchoring of debt, which will be spoken about in the next medium-term budget policy statement. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the policy around anchoring of debt and anchoring of spending actually looks like. And if that looks good, I mean, we see going forward a good trajectory for the debt profiling of South Africa.
Khotati, great to have you with us. Khotati Baloyi, trading structure at RMB. Thank you. Well, coming up, Israeli Central Bank Governor Amir Yaron praises the resilience of the economy. We hear more next. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, only on Bloomberg. The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute political news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Tyler Kendall in Washington, and this is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Bersachi in Dubai. Saudi Aramco has cancelled some deliveries of liquefied petroleum gas for the next few weeks after a support structure collapsed at its Juaima facility. The incident is set to cause tighter supplies of propane and butane, fuels used to produce chemicals, synthetic materials, and as a cooking gas. Aramco says the scope and duration of the impact remain under evaluation. Israeli Central Bank Governor Amir Yaron says the economy has shown great resilience since the war began in October 2023. Speaking at Bloomberg's Future of Israel's Capital Markets Forum yesterday, he added that one of the main drags is missing workers affecting the labor market.
What the markets are telling us is that they're at least saying Israel's geopolitical situation is much better, and to the extent that you think markets are forward-looking, it's telling you a lot. So that's in terms of financials. Fiscally, I said we were Israel in the last 15 or so years has shown great responsibility in terms of its fiscal performance. We've brought our debt to GDP from about 100% to 60%. And that was just prior to COVID. And I was one of the people who advocated, let's use that space in COVID, and I think that was true. And then it went up to about 72, 73, and then it dropped to 60 prior to the war. And in the war, in 2024, it went to about 67. It's now at around 68 and a half. And it was and I got to give the government here credit, or I'll give myself credit in a back way, in the sense that they listened to what I told them to do, okay, which is to do fiscal adjustments. In 2024, when we thought the war was going to end in the second part of 2024, we said it's okay for debt to GDP to go up, and I was talking to investors almost daily. We have a game plan. Once intensity will come down, debt to GDP will come down. And so we did fiscal adjustment of about 1%. In building up the 2025 budget, it was clear the war was going farther, more expenses. Debt to GDP went to 69%. And the government did another set of fiscal consolidation of about 1.5% of GDP.
That was Amir Yaron, the Israeli Central Bank Governor. Now, India and Israel are strengthening ties in the areas of defense, trade, and counterterrorism. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is making a rare visit to Israel, his first in 9 years. Addressing Parliament, Modi said a strong defense partnership between the two nations is of vital importance in today's uncertain world. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Dan Williams. Dan, talk to us about Modi's visit to Israel. What more came out of it?
Well, as you noted, this visit is a big deal, a bonanza of mutual goodwill. It's still underway. It's now entering its second day, after which the Indian Prime Minister will be heading out. It's his second visit to Israel in just under a decade. It's significant because Israel has yet to emerge from its war footing. Gaza is in a state of fragile ceasefire. There could imminently be another flare-up between Israel and Iran as part of that confrontation between Iran and the United States. But nonetheless, and this has been reflected also by comments such as those you aired by the Israeli central bank governor, Israel is really doing its best to signal economic resilience, and that's being picked up abroad. So while both sides are publicly emphasizing the positive sides of this relationship, the trade boons, the fact that Israel is expected to be the westernmost point of a corridor across the Middle East, a trade corridor, the easternmost point being in India. The underlying this, there is mutual concern about regional or the respective regional challenges. It's worth noting that Pakistan, the traditional adversary of India, has entered a mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia that Turkey is thinking of joining. It's quite possible what we're seeing here is rising powers in Asia and in the Middle East quietly setting up their own security axis in the hope that that will fend off what they see as respective threats in their own regions.
Yeah, reports on the Israeli Prime Minister looking to set that up. But listen, tensions are very high in the region right now. We've got a key round of negotiations taking place in Geneva. Dan, talk us through what Israel is doing to potentially prepare for what could be a broader war in Iran should the U.S. get involved militarily.
Well, the public position, as enunciated by the Israeli Prime Minister almost on a daily basis, is that Israel will respond on what is called an unimaginable scale, retaliating against Iran should Iran attack Israel. That would appear to be signaling that Israel is willing to sit this round out if the fighting, if the clash is restricted to Iran and the United States only. I don't think anyone really expects that to happen. In fact, Israel has quietly now played host to a brace of U.S. warplanes, U.S. refueling jets at Ben Gurion Airport, and this week, half a squadron, perhaps growing, of F-22s at a southern Israeli airbase. It would appear that Israel is at the very least helping out logistically with the American preparations, may even serve as a base of operations should indeed there be a U.S. attack on Iran. Israel is weathered to these Iranian attacks. There have been 3 rounds of missile attacks from Iran on Israel over the past 2 years. And it's a fair assumption that the Iranian capabilities have been in part spent by those previous rounds of fighting. So I think the Israelis believe that while they can expect to be hit, while they can expect to be sent back to shelters, perhaps in the middle of the night, should there be that flare-up, that war, that resurgence of war with Iran is something that would be tolerable, something the Israelis can weather, especially if they see this as a necessary measure to what they would consider a satisfactory outcome of that clash between the United States and Iran, an outcome that would reduce the Iranian threat perceived by Israelis, perhaps even bring about a change of the Iranian government to one that is more friendly or at least less hostile to the Israelis, given that the current regime has had hostility toward Israel really etched in its constitution for going on 50 years.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams, thank you so much for the reporting. Well, Egypt has unlocked around $2.3 billion in IMF funding. It follows a 5th review of its extended fund facility and a 6th review of its resilience and sustainability facility.
Eu começo a não gostar muito desse contexto, tá? Sinceramente, não me agrada. Eu vou salvar essas operações. Porque realmente não me agrada muito. Vou tentar revender mais uma vez lá pra cima, tá? Enfim. realmente não me agrada tanto assim, tá? Mas é, saí vendido aqui, saí praticamente uma operação num trailing stop, tá? Caramba, só me tirando hoje. Bom, agora eu vou deixar correr aí do jeito que tá? Os dois contratinhos que eu tenho aí já estão salvos. Então hoje vai dar para defender um pouco mais de $100 aí. Sempre procuro tentar salvar o mais rápido possível uma operação e sempre tento carregar o mais longe possível, né? Sempre tive essa mentalidade.
RSF arrangement, the IMF says that the macroeconomic situation has improved amid sustained stabilization efforts. But the organization added that progress on structural reforms under the program has been uneven. Coming up, a high-stakes conflict is brewing between the Pentagon and Anthropic. We'll bring you the details next. This is Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day.
Olha, não gosto dessa volatilidade, tá? De alta, muito rápido.
We are taking a step-by-step approach, a very systematic approach with India.
This is a time to put a little more defense into your portfolio.
Insight.
Bom, me tirou aí, tá? Tô em apenas um. Me tirou. Voltou muito rápido. O mercado tá muito comprador hoje. Então, histórico aqui de $117. Hoje não consegui carregar nenhuma operação, tá? Infelizmente. A verdade é que eu não fico muito à vontade em comprar. Por mais que esteja muito comprador, eu acho que o ouro subiu bastante. A gente tem um dólar ali trabalhando próximo da estabilidade, praticamente na estabilidade, né? Deixa eu ver aqui. DXY está caindo 0,11. Então acaba confluindo um pouco essa visão de comprar ouro, né? Uma vez que o dólar um pouco mais desvalorizado frente a outros pares de moeda, ficaria mais barato comprar ouro, né? Comercializar ouro. Então aumenta a demanda, né? Em tese. Um dólar barato favorece a demanda por ouro. Cinco minutos bem código de barras aqui, essas 3 barras, olha isso, né? Bom, eu tô com muita violência, eu já não fico tão à vontade assim em querer vender. Tem muito comprador ali defendendo posição. Começa a acreditar que isso seja indução para uma provável venda nesses patamares aqui de 5.215 a onça Troy. Eu tenho esse fair value. Olha, essa região seria uma região interessante para se vender, tá? Dependendo de como o preço chegar nessa região, provavelmente eu vou tentar vender. Caso o preço chegue, né? Óbvio. Eu tenho confluindo junto com o Fair Value. Esse Fair Value Gap já foi mitigado? Não. Começa a olhar com bons olhos, tá? Uma provável venda aqui ou aqui em cima, nessa região superior aqui. Duas regiões que a provável venda é no 5.215 a onça Troy. Caso não dê, pretendo vender em 5.247. É. Defendeu bem na região de 50% aqui, né?
with Haslinda Amin, only on Bloomberg.
Astonishing day for US technology.
Shaping the region's technology ecosystem.
Asia's biggest tech news and innovation.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Christina Raffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas. The sector is really propelling this deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors. We got a big week coming up in politics.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. A high-stakes standoff is unfolding between the Pentagon and one of the world's most powerful artificial intelligence companies. In today's Bloomberg Big Take, we look at the escalating feud between the U.S. Defense Department and Anthropic over the guardrails on AI systems used for military purposes and whether the Pentagon should have unrestricted access to the technology. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison. So, Laura, talk to us about this growing feud between Anthropic and the Pentagon.
Yes, this has been brewing for several weeks, but really hit a fever pitch today. You have Anthropic saying that it wants the Pentagon to have guardrails on how it uses its Claude AI platform. This is one of the most advanced platforms that the Pentagon has been using, but Anthropic has warned that there's certain things that it doesn't know exactly how the AI will react and doesn't want the Pentagon to be using it because of this. It could threaten people's safety. The Pentagon is saying that it needs to have full access to these tools to be able to do what it needs to, and if Anthropic doesn't allow that full access, and there's two things that they're looking at. One would be basically tapping a 1950s era law that allows the U.S. military to pull in different assets for its needs. You know, the U.S. has done this in the past with regards to energy or certain different critical minerals. The other, it would be an even more extreme step. This would be labeling Anthropic as a supply chain risk. This is something that's usually reserved for companies that are linked to foreign governments, not a U.S. company, and is really seen as would be a very extreme measure here.
Okay, still, let's stick with the topic of Anthropic. Really interesting article overnight saying that they're dropping their hallmark safety pledge, which is being viewed as a dramatic policy shift in the AI industry, but also for Anthropic as well as a company.
Yeah, Anthropic is one of the most cautious and safety-conscious artificial intelligence companies. It has really been out there, in front of all the others, kind of touting this as something that's very important to them. And so, we saw even, just a couple weeks ago, one of their top safety executives leave the company, citing that they were concerned with the direction the company is going. I'll note this hasn't gotten the company in the good graces of the Pentagon. There's still this really core tension there between Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, and Anthropic about how this program should be used. One of the things that the company has said is that this AI could be dangerous. You also have sort of a differing worldviews here as well. Anthropic has supported Democrats in the past. The CEO supported Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. It's seen as, quote, one of the more woke AI platforms, whereas Pete Hegseth is the king of all things anti-woke.
Super interesting context there. Laura Davison, thank you so much. And a reminder to our viewers that you can go to today's Big Take, NI Big Take Go, to get the full article on what has been going down between Anthropic and the Pentagon. All right, let's turn to markets now. A look before we head into the European session. And there is red on the screen today. S&P futures trading south, down 0.2%. NASDAQ down 0.3%. A lot of focus on those NVIDIA earnings. Pretty solid, I will say, but perhaps not enough to erase some of those concerns around AI, just easing them, is a quote that I borrowed from our MLive page, but I thought it was a good one. But that is the setup going into Europe. European futures also down about 0.2% as well. So mildly risk off. And of course, geopolitically, keeping a very close eye on how those negotiations in Geneva go this afternoon. And that is it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jemana Versace in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.
A cidade estava sitiada.
Isso, ao começo, eu não sabia o que fazer. Foi a mais terrível que eu passei na minha vida.
Eu temo, né, que o Brasil se torne, num futuro próximo, um narco-estado.
Porque no final, tudo é dinheiro.
People back home there, they are suffering. And someone is driving a Range Rover with their money.
Where is my money?
I think she's a scam up to now.
It's some of the world's most desperate people who are getting ripped off.
Repeat after me. I am a winner.
I didn't know how big it was. I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into.
If you tell me you have a vision of being $1 billion business, then you're going to have to do what it takes. And if you're not going to do that, everybody's going to suffer.
Nisho talagi kon ahma ta chuara pangok ahma le pa manchang le ngai kon mananya.
Una batalla a muerte.
Money can do a lot of good. It can really transform people's lives, but it can also hurt them.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Vonnie Quinn with your top stories. Nvidia, the world's most valuable company, easily beats estimates, but investors give the company's outlook a lukewarm reaction. Cuban forces kill 4 people who had approached the island on a Florida-tagged speedboat, risking escalation with the United States. Plus, the German Chancellor says Airbus is set to secure a major order from China as he continues his state visit to Asia's largest economy. The rally may have been arrested. Let's look at these markets. Europe is looking a little mixed right now, but in the United States, we are firmly lower. This after, of course, 2 nice gains in the last 2 sessions, bringing the Nasdaq 100, in fact, into the green for the year once again by just 0.3%. The S&P, however, is up 1.5% for the year after the last 2 days of gains. But we did have that nice rally yesterday. Nvidia could be setting the tone today. Those futures are looking just a little bit unsettled right now, slightly lower. And of course, that nice rally that we saw right after the results yesterday completely faded. 10-year yield still at 4.04, not much going on there. we're still looking at Japan very closely. That yen at 155.92. Obviously, the dollar is weakening just in general against many major Asian currencies, but the yen strengthening today just by about a big figure. Some of your risk events for Thursday. Those Gordon and Denton polls, they open at 7 UK time. That by-election obviously happening. 8:30 a.m. UK time, ECB President Christine Lagarde is speaking at the European Parliament. And then, of course, later on today at 1:30 p.m. UK time, we get US jobless claims. NVIDIA, the dominant maker of artificial intelligence processors, has failed to impress investors perhaps with its latest sales forecast. The chip maker delivered a first quarter outlook that easily beat average estimates, but there was little change in the shares over concerns about an overheated AI economy. For more, I'm joined by Bloomberg senior market strategist Neil Campling. Talk us through the numbers, Neil, because we might be over-concentrated on the share price reaction.
Yeah, the numbers themselves were undeniably strong and solid. The key upside to the fiscal fourth quarter was a $2 billion upside on revenues, and that was driven by data center. The CEO mentioned that data center, 50% of those revenues of $62 billion were coming from the hyperscalers. That was very strong. The guidance for fiscal Q1 of $78 billion of revenue was a great, $6 billion ahead of street consensus. So those numbers itself were very strong. There were some concerns, you could argue, around some of the things, such as the supply commitments, which jumped from about 50 billion to 90 billion in the quarter, which people were talking after the numbers that could be about the memory shortage, securing supply ahead of that time. And the OpenAI commitments, there was no qualification that that deal is yet done. So again, we're still waiting when there's nervousness around that in the market.
So definitely still some open questions. Now, we also learned that the US government has granted NVIDIA a license to ship H200 chips to China with a 25% fee and so on. How much might that actually contribute, even though probably not next quarter, right? They're not going to count it?
That's correct. They're not including the China potential of data center revenues in the guidance itself. So that's a potential incremental upside to those numbers. I think overall it's fairly small. The caveat, of course, is that the US government has approved that. The Chinese government hasn't yet. So it's still another uncertainty as to whether that becomes a big growth driver in the future, or whether the tensions around IP and between the China and the US is still a concern, I think, going forward this year.
All right. Neil Campling, thank you so much on NVIDIA there. Well, as I said, NVIDIA failing to impress investors despite that blockbuster quarter amid concerns about the impact AI will have on the wider economy. Let's bring in Mark Cranfield, Bloomberg Markets Live cross-asset strategist. So, Mark, the implied move was at least 5%. We got almost there, and then that move faded. What's your take?
Well, as Neil was saying, it's partly about what NVIDIA didn't tell investors here. So there wasn't much clarity on China, how they propose to do more in the Chinese markets. Now they've got some approvals. They didn't say much more about Blackwell chips, which in the previous couple of quarters has been a very big deal for them, a huge amount of money invested in there. They didn't give much guidance on that. So investors a little bit disappointed there. And then you've got the other side of the equation, the things that NVIDIA is now competing with, which weren't so clear just a year ago or even a few months ago. So you've got, just in the past few days, things like Advanced Micro has got a huge deal now with Meta. So clearly competition is starting to build up with NVIDIA's products as well. So Meta's made a very big deal there, and they're going to invest in AMD as well. You're seeing also from an investor's point of view, the alternatives now are looking a lot more attractive away from the United States. So even going back, say, just 6 months ago, when NVIDIA stock started to go sideways, it wasn't so clear that the rest of the world was such a great place. Now it is. You've got where global investors are looking to put their money into Samsung, into SK Hynix, into Taiwan Semiconductor. These stocks are absolutely roaring, and their currencies are appreciating at the same time. So it's a double whammy. If you're a global macro investor, not only do you see potential upside on the equities, which are relatively undervalued compared to some of their US peers, there's currency appreciation as well. This all detracts from the opportunities that NVIDIA has. So no longer is it a case of I must be in the big tech companies in America. there are equally attractive, maybe even better alternatives in the rest of the world. Asia certainly has some of those. So this is what is a difference from a global investor's point of view. They can see other places.
Bom, pessoal, já são 3h29. Sinceramente, hoje eu já tô bem cansado. Londres aí começando bem lateral, né? Aqui o Zone de Londres. Londres tem sido lateral, né, nas últimas sessões, né? Aqui ela subiu no início. Não, aqui foi Ásia. Londres lateral. Tô bem bullish no ouro, pra ser sincero. Mesmo eu tentando vender na sessão de hoje. Bom, pessoal, pra ser sincero, eu vou descansar no dia de hoje. Eu já fiz bastante coisa hoje. Hoje eu tentei vender 4 vezes, né? Até sair um pouco fora do gerenciamento. Geralmente eu gosto de abrir 3 ordens por sessão. Hoje eu acabei abrindo 4. E nenhuma das operações eu consegui dar continuidade, né? Todas me tiraram num trailing stop, na proteção. Bom, eu tomaria cuidado se eu fosse continuar operando. O mercado, o início da sessão de Londres aí tá um pouco lateral, tá? Um pouco indefinido. Sinceramente, eu começo a olhar esse preço subindo, tá? Minha visão é que que o Shao continue subindo, tá? Pelo menos no curtíssimo prazo. Eu tenho um VIX positivo quase 1% e o DX trabalhando próximo da estabilidade, 0,08 de queda agora, né? Lembrando que um DX caindo favoreceria o Shao, tá? Um dólar mais barato favorece a compra de ouro. Talvez uma perspectiva de novos cortes na taxa de juros dos Estados Unidos traria um arrefecimento na cotação do Shao, mas a tendência é um juros higher for long, né, nos Estados Unidos. A tendência é que os juros permaneçam pelo menos por um período de médio prazo aí nos patamares, né? Eu acredito que o Fed ele não vai fazer a contratação de novos cortes na taxa de juros, tá? Nas próximas reuniões. Talvez com o início do mandato do novo presidente do Fed, o Kevin Walsh, né, entrando no lugar do Powell, eu acredito que ele tenha uma visão de um dólar mais fortalecido e ao mesmo tempo ele tem uma visão de redução na taxa de juros dos Estados Unidos, tá? Isso para médio prazo. Então, tenderia a beneficiar uma queda no Shao mais expressiva, tá? Pelo menos no médio prazo, mas a tendência de alta, o Shao está muito comprador na minha visão. Tá difícil conseguir carregar uma venda. Tivemos essa mudança de caráter aqui, mas lembrando que tivemos essa mudança aqui, mas lembrando que caso o preço ele rompa esse topo aqui, eu acho que a tendência seria o Shao buscar patamares superiores, tá? Caso ele rompa esse topo aqui. Isso daqui iria se configurar a espécie de um Judas Swing, tá? Aonde este topo aqui, aonde este fundo, essas mínimas aqui, essa região de sell side liquidity, seria uma região forte dos compradores, tá? A gente enxergaria uma atuação bem agressiva dos compradores defendendo as suas posições aqui nessas regiões, caso haja o rompimento deste topo aqui, tá? No caso, o preço renovou a mínima, mas não conseguiu, ele quebrou a estrutura, mas não conseguiu renovar a mínima, né? No caso, o preço ele rompeu a mínima. Caso ele rompa esta região, eu acredito que esta região, uma volta, seria uma região forte, tá? Este fundo seria forte. E aí, eu vou deixar algumas regiões marcadas aqui. Eu acho complicado deixar marcado agora porque ainda não rompeu, tá? Ainda não rompeu. Mas é, é uma região grande, né? É. Fica difícil deslumbrar uma compra aqui nesse contexto, tá? O mercado criou muita liquidez interna. Toda essa região aqui eu enxergo uma região de briga, tá? Uma região perigosa para se operar. Na realidade, prefiro ficar de fora e prefiro enxergar algum sinal mais claro que me possibilite a vender, confluindo com algum contexto macroeconômico que favoreça a demanda ou a oferta do ouro. Eu acho que tá difícil operar agora. Bom, pessoal, eu vou descansar um pouco, já são 3h40. Hoje eu pretendo operar um pouquinho Bolsa Brasileira também, eu pretendo dar uma olhada. Então, recapitulando, no dia de hoje eu fiz 4 operações, tá? Nenhuma das operações eu consegui atingir o alvo, todas me tiraram no trailing stop, todas elas me tiraram na proteção, tá? Fiz um total de 117,80. Mas é isso, pessoal. Eu vou descansar, lembrando que as minhas lives de forma alguma é uma sala de sinal, tá? Apenas eu uso a plataforma do YouTube para poder constituir um journal trade para que eu possa revisitar no futuro e melhorar pontos aonde eu devo melhorar no meu operacional, tá? Também para mostrar um pouco do meu trabalho, né? Já opero há mais de 7 anos. Sou estudante de economia e deixem aí sugestões de quais ativos que vocês desejam me ver operando, né? Eu opero o Russell, né, o índice de small caps também dos Estados Unidos, eu opero Nasdaq, S&P, enfim, deixem aí sugestões. Peço que vocês tenham um pouco de paciência. Eu tô começando a fazer live agora. Tô começando a aprender, né? E é isso, pessoal. Tá? Bom descanso a todos. Fui!